after graduating from Santa Barbara University there, I went to University of Southern California, and I had a bit of a scholarship and I had a teaching assistant. At that time there was a real shortage of teachers, so I took one course in how to teach during the summer, then got a job in Santa Paula, California. Taught there for 3 years when I was pretty well booted out for speaking against the administration at a teachers meeting. This was really an interesting story because they were attempting to introduce merit rating. You know, so you tick whether you're doing this, and that would, your pay would be adjusted accordingly. It was absolutely outrageous. There was even things like attends church regularly. All of the teachers were infuriated by this, but nobody would say anything.
Yeah.
And the union wasn't that strong yet. It was only about half of the teachers actually belonged to the union. Anyway, I was always believed in saying what I thought, so I spoke out at a teachers meeting. And it turned out that the superintendent and a bunch of the principals were listening to this meeting on the school intercom.
That's fine.
So my wife and we had just the one kid then, talked about moving here because I liked it, and I'd always planned to move to Canada, actually, partly because my mother, though she was born in Belgium, she grew up in Alberta. We were going to come up on a kind of exploratory trip. Coming into the city, I can't remember then, I think it was still a little narrow Fraser Bridge. Vancouver was very quiet, all the cars were little, Austins and so on. I don't know, it just appealed to me so well, so much. So part of the plan was that we were going to come up on a kind of exploratory trip. Yeah, 51, 52, somewhere around there. Yeah, I just loved it, you know, it seemed so civilized compared to Los Angeles, for example, where I was spending time. Santa Barbara, even though Santa Barbara is certainly beautiful, but you know, I don't know, politics, everything else. I loved this country and had read a good deal. And in fact, when I went to University of Southern California, there was a course in Canadian history which I took. Now, I think probably the only one in the United States. And again, very impressed with the history of the country, the way it was formed, about sort of non-violence, and the whole idea of you know, peace and good government, and not like the United States. Anyway, so when the whole thing in Santa Paula blew up, so you know, we had planned an exploratory trip up here because, like, I guess the sort of idealistic 30-year-olds, 29-year-olds, I had this particularly this idea of living in the country and subsistence farming, you know, the old, really that emerged big time in the 60s, but I was way ahead of my time then, I guess. So that was part of the idea, but then because we just decided, well, pack up and just come up here. So in 1960, as soon as school was out, June, we packed up the Volkswagen van, because my whole idea of school and education was becoming more and more radical all the time. I was not happy with the school system, and I knew I was not going to be able to survive this very long. So fortunately, the last 2 years, I think it was, I was teaching what was then known as educatable, something mentally retarded. They were just normal kids who didn't like school. Was right. the way I picked. But I was able to get away with anything. Like, we didn't do any schoolwork. The kids played around all day, and the changes in those kids was so amazing. Sure. They grew up and became totally responsible. They won the floor hockey match. They did all kinds of things. Wow. Everybody thought they were just dumb kids, you know. Well, hardly. So I had written a couple of things critical of the school system, and then I got a call from some people here at the new school And that was a school that was founded by UBC profs for their kids, because they wanted something more liberal. Everyone had read Summerhill then, and a lot of other books critical of the public education system. So they eventually offered me the job of headmaster or director, whatever it's called, of that school. So we packed up and moved to Vancouver.
And where was that school located?
15th and Commercial. There's a building there now. It's not that building that the school was is long gone, but there's an alternative school right on that block there somewhere. So that's kind of tradition that held. Anyway, that was quite a year, because while I was brilliant in my talking about freedom and education, all that kind of thing. But then, of course, when it's actually seen in practice, the kids go nuts, which is exactly right. I mean, even A.S. Neal talks about that. You take all the rules away, and then they have to, it's like they're 2-year-olds again. They want to just test every possible boundary.
So the school at 15th and Commercial by Clark Park, was that one of the very first alternative schools in Vancouver?
I think so, I think so. Yeah. And it went on for quite a few years after that.
At UBC at that time, they had the Arts 1 program.
That's right.
Remember?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So it was a similar idea, if you like.
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of that kind of movement in those days, especially what with kids being so much, I don't know, man, they were active, politically active, and not, I don't know what's happened to young people these days, because that was very exciting time to be in Vancouver. And I became a kind of education guru during that year. We were here, and I did all kinds of speeches and so on. It was great.
So, and then Commercial Drive, just to bring it back to Grandview, I mean, and then in the early 70s you had the Free University. Do you know much about that?
Yes, I was involved in that.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Can you go into a bit of
So in
detail?
1970, so 68, 1971, the free school was kind of falling apart too, where the enrollment was dropping, because a lot of the public schools had co-opted a lot of our ideas, and there's still like those alternative programs in the schools that didn't exist before then. So instead of getting the push-outs, dropouts, bright kids who couldn't handle it, they were getting programs within the school. So 71 to 77.
And that's when the Free University was operating at the Van Nuys
During
Cultural
that
Center?
time, yeah.
So what year did it start?
I don't know, 72, 73, somewhere around there. So then I was working on an LIP project.
Which is what I was doing at that very same year, 73.
Yeah, it was great. It was a scam in a way, because I don't think we ever really did anything. But $400 a month, I mean, you could live very nicely on that.
It's funny, because 1975, when I graduated from Simon Fraser in 74 with a teaching certificate, in 75 I was running the alternative school in West Vancouver.
Oh, all right. Yeah. What was that? You weren't at...
It was called SWAP, the Sentinel Work Activity Project, out of Sentinel Secondary.
Because there is that school over there that's still going. It was started around that time. Yeah, I remember the name of it.
They had that was a boys program, and then they also had a girls program.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Some really interesting kids, for sure.
Yeah, well, all the interesting kids end up in programs like that, of course.
So true. I actually ran the one for New Westminster Secondary as well. And, I was a teacher in it, which is the second biggest high school in Canada. So they had 800 grade 8s, and I had like the 10 worst grade 8s out of 800. And they were great kids.
Absolutely.
And then I ran the program in Delta, out of North Delta Senior Secondary too, the alternate school.
Yeah, anybody with any brains will not be able to stand school.
Including the teachers,
Including the teachers. Yeah, that's why all the good teachers drop out. So, a friend of mine and I formed the Dropout Teachers Society. It was actually quite funny.
I'll have to join.
Our motto was, we help people out. We got actually quite a bit of publicity in just a few months we did that. It was quite...
When was that?
Well, it was when I was first in Burnaby, so 71, 72, somewhere around there.
During the Free University days,
Yeah. For the Free University, I think I was working down here at the time, and I know my friends had a free school or a free education section there. We were giving, doing information about schools and stuff like that. I honestly don't remember the years. But
and how pioneering was the Free University? Was there anything like it around Vancouver?
Not that I know of.
And how would you describe it? What was it? What was the idea behind it?
I really don't know, other than it was people were offering courses, I guess, or
pretty well anybody could say.
More like a seminar kind of.
And more or less unpaid?
Oh, totally free.
Totally unpaid.
Yeah, totally free.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot to do with it. It was my friend Judy and some other people that I knew who really were there and ran it. So then after that, God, when did I do that? I don't think 1972, but I couldn't have done everything in 1972. But I worked at the Vancouver East Cultural Center.
Well, you're freed up by your LIP grant to do things.
Yeah, this was an LIP. So I worked for a year on LIP at the Culch.
Yeah.
And that was in the early days when it was Chris Wooten, Murray Skuse, and Wendy Newman.
Wow.
And, the place was still a mess, and they were fixing things up. But they already started doing shows and stuff there. So it was very exciting.
And it had been an empty church before that?
Yeah, after the Free University folded. So
I
guess they kind of moved in, and I think on something like a Opportunities for Youth grant or something like that anyway. So that's how the culture was started. And, always by one person. It's like the York Theatre, the Vogue. It's not the cultural services or any of those highly paid people. It's always somebody with a mission who makes those things happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, then they don't get much recognition.
So
the city takes over and takes all the credit. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, as you may know, but fled home when I was 18, I guess, and went to San Francisco, where I lived for a couple of years. I managed to get into Reed College, and went to Reed for a couple of years.
By the way, why don't you explain Reed College?
Yeah.
I mean, of all the places that Stephen Jobs could have picked to go, that's where he picked to go.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. No.
And there was a reason. Yeah. Because it had because of the reputation it had. Right?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
So you might explain that.
Well, I mean, Reed was a great liberal arts college, a private college. Apparently an international reputation. I mean, the only reason I went there was because they had a harpsichord. And I got really fascinated by the whole idea of the harpsichord and early music. My piano teacher was horrified. But anyway, so I went to Reed for a summer and stayed on for about another 2 years before I just thought I just can't. Well, I had no money whatsoever. My parents wouldn't support me at all because I was too independent of them. So eventually I ended up back in Santa Barbara and finished my degree in music history at the university there, at the University of California.
What was your involvement in saving the York Theatre?
Oh boy. That was around 1980. So I moved down here in 1977. I moved to East Vancouver. And I lived on Rose Street. Had a house there, actually.
Wow. Rose?
How did I get involved in the York Theatre?
Yeah, what was your involvement in trying to save it?
I had been to a number of shows there, plays. I remember seeing Janet Wright in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And, stuff like good stuff. And then I don't know how I heard that it was actually the Patel brothers were running it as kind of a Bollywood. They were showing various movies, but it was
in the 90s.
Oh no! This was in 1980 something.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So see, the Little Theatre bailed out in 1977.
Oh.
So then I guess it was right after that the Patel brothers started showing films there. And anyway, the rumor was that the owner, whose name was Kazimir Sidhu, I'd met him. He probably owned half of the city. Anyway, so rumor was he was going to tear it down. So we formed the Save the York Theatre Society.
What year would that be?
81, I think it was.
So it took a while to save it.
Yes. Yeah, I always say 25-year project. I never gave up. That's it.
Amazing.
So Yeah, 81, I think it was. Anyway, Mr. Sidhu was, oh yeah, sure, I don't care. He was so we put together a proposal for restoration and redevelopment of the theater then, but that didn't fly. And that was the same year as the fire hall that got the money from Heritage Canada, I think it was at the time, or Department of Canadian Heritage, as it was probably known, in the good old days when we weren't afraid of using more than 2 words.
So wow, well you're on the top floor.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
And what a great view.
It is remarkable, isn't it? It's the $1 million view that you get with subsidized rent.
It's amazing what some of these low-cost places, the lifestyles.
Well,
pretty interesting.
I mean, it's the height of the building that was, of course, the height restriction bylaw hadn't come in yet, I guess, when this was built in 1974.